Hello, partners and friends, fellow GMers here, Manny Crespo and Ruben Gottlieb. As you may already know, Ruben and I are both partners here at Greenspoon Martyr in the Miami office, and we're also part of a smaller subdivision of partners and associates that comprise the Latin American Practice Group, LATAM for short. And Ruben and I have been asked to provide some highlights of 2022 in terms of takeaways from the year that we've seen in our respective areas of the industry. So we're here to discuss that today. And of course, we're always available to all of you. Should you have any particular questions you'd like to email us, I'll just say that in advance to get out of the way. We are available to you always and at all times. So as some of you are already familiar with me, I'm one of your real estate guys here in the Miami office. My area of concentration is residential and commercial real estate transactions, and the bulk of my clientele is Latin American, which means I have the distinctive pleasure of working with other practice groups in the firm in order to structure their investments that are inbound and also give them the best orientation possible for either their personal estate planning, corporate planning, and family office objectives. And I lean on our fellow practice groups here at Greenspoon Martyr in order to do that in a framework that makes sense to our Latin American clients. And with that, I will hand the floor over to our partner, Ruben, so he can tell us a little bit about himself and his practice.
Thank you, Manny. I don't know what more I can add. You were so eloquent. But as all of you know by now, my name is Ruben Gottlieb, and I'm a tax practitioner. The vast majority, I'd say about 70%, of what I do is inbound Latin America, some Europe, tax and wealth planning. I remember when I started years ago, my beard was black. We were estate planners. Now we're wealth transfer individuals. But that's what I do. I take clients who have assets here in the United States, and we make it the most tax beneficial possible, considering all the laws and all the blacklists and things of that nature. And we make sure that their assets gets to their beneficiaries with the least amount or no tax as possible. And I rely, Manny and I work closely together in a number of items. Everything I do is inbound. I don't do anything outbound. But that's in a nutshell what I do. And we were put together to do the Latin American practice.
Yeah, and I think an important addition to that is that your practice area, Ruben, which involves taxation, even though it is mostly inbound work, we're always taking into consideration how to make our system play well, if you will, with the systems available to our clients in their jurisdictions. So right. There's a lot of collaboration and learning by osmosis with our counterparts, both accountants and lawyers in those foreign jurisdictions, which I think brings us to, what we've observed and what changes have happened that have been remarkable in our area of Latin American practice in Latin America in 2022. So why don't you tell me a couple of things that you've seen that maybe have impacted the type of advice you've been giving in 2022 in view of, for example, a lot of the taxation changes that have happened in my core clientele jurisdictions, which would be, the typical, the four players, I call them, Colombia, Chile of late, Mexico, and Peru. There's some Brazil in there, but I don't have a whole lot of Brazilian clients, and your experience may be different.
Yeah, and I would add to that Argentina. The bottom line is wherever there's turmoil is where we're going to see most of our clients coming, because the initial reaction is, how do I get my money out if it's not out already? How do I protect it? And how do I protect my family? And that's really what we do. But we always do it in conjunction with local counsel. Yesterday, I was dealing with Argentinian counsel and two individuals matters, and Costa Rican counsel and another. So we always try to bring in local counsel, and we have to plan for the structures in their home countries, and they're different. The structure, for example, in Argentina, I have to do irrevocable trusts from a reporting standard in Argentina. In Costa Rica, I'm doing Canadian limited partnership. So each country is different. Each country, we want to consult with local counsel. And for example, Colombia, and I guess David can address this more, The law was recently changed starting this year, the reporting requirements, and a lot of countries have gone the way of the United States with global taxation. So with all that in mind, you know, we have to tread gently. We always have to be in contact with local counsel, and if the client doesn't have one, we have people we use throughout the countries. But laws are constantly, especially tax laws throughout the Latin America especially, are constantly changing. And they're coming up with laws, and then they're coming up with amnesties. And then people say, well, I don't want to go in the amnesty because I don't trust local counsels. So it's a never-ending battle that we see, but it's a delicate dance that we dance.
Yeah, and what I've noticed in these countries that I mentioned earlier, because they are the ones that I've been seeing the most exportation of capital coming from, with the exception, I left Argentina out, but I personally noticed that Argentina has sort of trickled in 2022, which was surprising. Seen a lot of capital coming out of Colombia, Chile, Peru, and Mexico because of very significant changes in the tax codes in those countries, and also in terms of corporate transparency. Whereas, for example, in Colombia, as of very recently, they basically, and I don't know if every element passed in the laws, but all of the corporate transparency and even the ability to pierce a corporate veil, both for government and for other civil persons and institutions, changed, because that corporate veil used to be sacrosanct in Colombia. And I've noticed that we've had a lot of Colombians, that are existing clients and new ones, seeking our assistance in order to try and restructure them in a manner where they are now in a third-party environment, because they know full well that the U.S. is a relatively transparent country. So they seek U.S. counsel's assistance in order to, export their corporate existence elsewhere. Have you seen that in your practice?
100%. And then we have to be, virtually everybody wants to be in the States, and they want us to help them with their assets here. And every time the laws change, then everybody gets in an uproar, and they feel like they need to do something right away. And then things settle in the country, and they see that the enforcement isn't as stringent as they were afraid of. But we're constantly finding new ways of creating structures so that people can have their assets here and still not be taxed here and have their structures here. So whether we put it in an irrevocable trust, or whether we put it in a Nevada trust, South Dakota trust, and we make them the protectors, there's things we can still do, still be within the law in the United States in avoiding the estate tax and income tax and gift tax to some degrees, and still be compliant with their home countries. But as their laws are changing, the structures are changing, and everybody scrambles to build a better mousetrap. And sometimes it's just better to just let's take a wait and see look and not rush into things.
Yeah. One of the wait and sees that came to my attention last year in terms of very interesting changes, and I don't know if this has applicability in other jurisdictions, but Mexico, for example, used to have a very specific requirement where closely held companies, for example, could not have any sort of remote attendance in meetings or in delegatory obligations for their officers. They literally had to be on the ground in a room with four walls when they wanted to take any sort of official corporate action. That is in the process. If it hasn't been already, that's also in the process of being done away. So we've got a lot of potential Mexican influx of corporate activity to the exterior, and the most natural place for them to go is going to be here in the U.S. So sure. That's one of the things that I think we need to be prepared for. And I'm wondering, in terms of tax treaties and such, how that might impact the way that the U.S. and Mexico currently conduct taxation issues with each other. If you have anything to add in that regard.
I do. Mexico, we have to go back to 1996 when Mexico issued the first blacklist where structures couldn't be in what they called paraísos fiscales, in tax havens. And they had a whole list of them. In fact, they had Venezuela on the list in 1996, went into effect 1997. And the story was that when Venezuela created its blacklist, they were on it. because they just lifted Mexico's. But Mexico has seen, we used to do offshore structures, offshore companies, offshore trusts, and then we switched to New Zealand structures with Singapore companies. And then those became somewhat blacklisted. And then we switched to Canadian limited partnerships. And now those are under the new law in Mexico. None of this is illegal. It's just all reportable. So now we're looking for other structures. And, there's good reason for that. I have a cousin who married a Mexican. She's from Costa Rica. We're from Costa Rica. And her husband had already been kidnapped. He had what they call an express kidnap, where they throw you in the back of a trunk. They ask for your family to provide anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000, and they get it and they let you out. And then her kids were at a movie, and she got a call that says, "We know your children are at this movie. They're seeing this at this theater. They get out at this time. If you don't give us X amount of money, we're going to kidnap them." And I only know this because I saw her when I was visiting Costa Rica. And I said, "What are you doing here, Tati?" And she said, I wanted to see my parents. In reality, her brother pulled me over, my other cousin, and said, "No, that's not what happened." And he explained it to me. So yeah, there is reason for this, for fear, and why people want, a reticence to report. But
and Ruben, yeah, you raise an extremely good and important point, because, many here, including our colleagues, assume that because you're assisting clients, or we are assisting clients, in structuring things overseas, there may be something nefarious at hand, whether it be, outright avoidance of taxes, which, we all know there's nothing wrong with trying to avoid taxes as long as you're not evading taxes.
Exactly.
But that there may be some dark money involved. And in many instances, our Latin American clientele, even though they're very, very high net worth individuals, they are basically the targets of either the types of threats that you mentioned, or, although they're not existing politically exposed persons, they may at some point become that because of their affiliation with other, associates in their investment structure or their businesses, where all of a sudden they become targets of a government that did not like who they've associated themselves with. And then a lifetime, or maybe, generational wealth that's been built up over a very long time, all of a sudden is at risk by an adversarial government. And that is something that we are assisting these people in trying to avoid by guiding them in their restructuring and the sorts of investments that they're making here in the United States and other jurisdictions. What are your thoughts on that?
That's 100% correct. We don't evade taxes. We help avoid taxes, but taxes are only one aspect of it. I remember a few years back, at my former firm, my immigration partner had a Brazilian client, and he said, "Ruben, I want you to meet with him for pre-immigration tax planning." And I said, "Great." I met with the fellow, and I said, "If you wait to come here," it was October, I said, "if you wait to come till January, I can save you $3.4 million of capital gains because I know you're selling one of your buildings in Brazil." He said, "Ruben, listen to me." He goes, "I've been held up. My family is jeopardized. Everybody knows how wealthy we are. I have to get out of there." I said, "Listen, I agree with you 100%. Come here. We'll do what we can before you get here. Come here, and we'll worry about what you have when you get here and how we can lower your taxes." So not everything is tax driven. A lot of it is country driven. A lot of these countries, I've traveled to every place in Latin America many times, and except for Paraguay and Bolivia, and I'm told I'm not missing anything. But these countries are dangerous countries. Even Costa Rica, where we're from, where we never saw crime, has crime. So taxes are important, don't get me wrong, and we're setting up these structures, but there are real life situations going on, and these people who live there live it daily, and we need to help them.
Understood. Another big change from 2022 that was notable was the Chilean constitutional rewrite, which again, very definitely and directly affects the reportation and the taxation status of individuals. We already know, at least in the LATAM group, very well established that several years ago, Chile engaged in the quote unquote blanqueo de capital, which essentially means, confess now, we won't treat you too badly, and we'll only charge you, I think it was 2 or 4% on whatever you haven't reported previously. But now we've had, this broad sweeping change in the Constitution, which is once again going to affect, transparency and taxation in Chile. And I don't know if you've seen this, but, those in our firm should be aware that the amount of capital being exported from Chile in particular, and from other jurisdictions where Chileans have their money, where Chile is now starting to be able to gather information, is remarkable. And I feel as though every lawyer out there should be that works in the transactional investment and wealth management field needs to have the capacity to be ready for this, influx of capital, which I think is going to flow into 2023 and beyond. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that in your practice as well.
We're seeing it. We're starting. It's still early in 2023, but we have to gauge it by the end of 2022. Every country, including us, have had an amnesty. We started 2009, 2011, 2014. It's a little bit more dangerous, though, in Latin America, because many lands say, I don't want to reveal what I have to the authorities because they don't trust the authorities, and in some cases with good reason. So we're seeing it every time there's a change in the reporting or a quote unquote amnesty. We're going to see the flight capital come because people don't want to give up the information. Yes, there are people who definitely do not want to pay taxes. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, Manny, where they come in and say, look, I don't mind paying taxes in your country, but I don't pay taxes in my country. And I tell them, I can't help you. Don't tell me that. We're here to help you from a U.S. standpoint. But we're seeing that more and more. And the amnesties are almost working reverse of what they were intended to do in Latin America because of that. People just don't want to come clean. They just don't want to reveal everything that they have. And there are different taxes too. So, there are wealth taxes. We don't have a wealth tax per se. We have an income tax. We have an estate. We have a gift tax. Our taxes have taxes. I think I have 12 tax courses, and that's all we have are taxes. But they have different taxes. And to some reason, that's why we don't have treaties with some countries, because you have to have the same or similar tax in their home country that we have. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing it. The amnesties are not what they're made out to be. Some people are cleaning part of their funds, but not all of it. And they're coming here more and more with their funds, and they want to invest. Their flight money, their risk money is in their home country. They want stability here.
Right. And in terms of just, and this may be news or may not be news to, a lot of our non-LATAM practitioners, but a lot of this obviously is historically cultural, right? These people have lived historically through a number of coups that may have lasted a lot of years. There's a lot of political instability, which even though in recent times in the US, we've been shocked by a couple of things that we've seen, they sort of pale in comparison, realistically speaking, to what, those of us from the Latin American world and culture can attest to and give information about.
Look at Peru and Brazil right now. We're seeing it going on.
Precisely. So would you think it's kind of important for those who are perhaps approached or have leads into Latin American clients to really just take advantage of the fact that they have this resource here within the firm to kind of float things by us, even though they may be doing the substance of the work? Say, what's the deal in this country, and not necessarily trust what's being published in the news, because there's a lot of insider information that historical knowledge within our practice group can perhaps provide them nuance that they don't otherwise get.
100%. I mean, I know I speak for you and myself and everybody in the group when I say that if any practitioner out there, whether they're part of our law firm or other firms, if they want to ask us questions about different countries or different structures or different cultures, because everybody tends to lump Latin America together as one, banana republic. Each country has its own culture and its own speech, in fact. But I know I speak for all of us that if anybody out there has any questions, just pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call us.
And I want to underscore something that you just said, which I think is not only very true, but extremely, extremely important to recognize. Whether they think of, or whether people think of Latin America as, one sort of banana republic, as using your words,
Well, Costa Rica
we're
is
dealing with
public.
we're dealing with Central and South, right?
Yeah.
And Mexico's technically North America, but I'm going to lump them in, lump it in for these purposes.
Sure.
It cannot be stressed enough. This is not the difference between, Florida and California in this country, or Florida and Washington. Yes, there are slight regional differences, slightly different accents, but the fact that we're dealing with a lot of independent countries with extremely different particular histories has given us, a basket of literally very, very, very different jurisdictions, which have maybe a foundation in, Roman or Latin civil code, but that's about it. It's
Right.
that different from one country to another. So you really have to understand where your client is accustomed to doing business and have a connection to whatever advisors they've had or whatever advisors they're going to need. Because just because you've helped a client in Venezuela, for example, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to help a client in Colombia and understand what you're doing.
Right. With the same structure, 100%. Each country is different. And there are, for example, you go to a soccer match between Argentina and Brazil, you better be sitting in the section. I mean, if you think that there's a rivalry between the Jets and the Dolphins, forget about it. There's no rivalry like a Latin rivalry. they'll throw things unmentionable to the opposing side. So, you have to know that. You have to know that. You have to know that Brazil is 2/3 of Latin America. People think it's a little small country. No, it's not. And so you've got to have an idea of where you're dealing with. Try to educate yourself in the culture, in the people. And one thing else, and I guess we're getting ready, to wrap things up here, Manny. Although I've enjoyed talking with you, and you're my neighbor, so we'll continue. But you've got to know the different cultures. These clients are very loyal clients. You're their licenciado, you're their doctor, and they rely on you, especially coming here to do business. If they're contacting you and they hire you, you're everything to them. They will do what you say for the most part. They're very loyal. They will go see who you want them to see. And that's a responsibility that I take, and I know you take on very seriously. So I would tell you, if you're working in this area, if you've got clients in this area, feel yourself lucky, because they're loyal, good clients for the vast majority of them.
Very true. So we were also asked if we could think of any, either the biggest or big takeaways for 2022. And the minute I saw that question, the first thing that came to mind is never trust the pundits. I sincerely thought that with all the news coming out of this country and all the craziness and the economy, et cetera, that we were going to see, some sort of grind or slowdown in what was coming to us from Latin America in particular. And I don't think it could have been any the more opposite. In fact, it just got bigger.
Exactly. Whenever there's turmoil in somebody's country, we do better from that country. So when there's elections, we have to pay close attention to the election in that country. If there's a tax change or a corporate change or any change in the law, something we need to be concerned with. So that's true. A lot of things happened last year and are continuing to happen now. I mentioned two, Peru and Brazil, but there'll be more changes. Colombia changed its law, so we expected to see this onslaught of Colombian business. But yeah, I agree with you. The pundits got it wrong. So,
yeah. And you keep raising good points. Another good point is that, unfortunately, well, for good or for bad, we're kind of all Latin America law wonks. So we're following this stuff, and
right.
We kind of have it at our fingertips. So that's another thing everybody will want to consider is, you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel if you need a quick answer to something. Sure. Everyone in the LATAM group may be a good resource for you. And, we just want to keep driving that home because we're here for a purpose. I think the wisdom of assembling our group, that's the essential and I think primary product is that we're here as a resource for the entire firm, and hopefully can have a lot of quick answers, concerning these jurisdictions that might otherwise require, maybe some additional work or research whereas we might have the answer right away. And
We don't have
before,
the answer. We know where the library is.
yeah, and before the time expires here, we've been asked to maybe address, any events other than COVID directly that may have affected our respective, our industry in general, but our respective practice groups. I can say that for me, in representing a number of developers that are here, but are basically backed by Latin American investors, is that, and it is an indirect result of COVID, that the supply chain difficulties really snagged us up quite a bit, particularly where, for example, we have companies that work with suppliers that again are based out of Latin America, and their port limitations and quarantines, et cetera, were very different, and in many cases, strangely enough, far stricter than here in the US. And there's sort of a perception here that, okay, well, COVID's over, but over there, COVID is most certainly not over. In Chile, for example, there is still no in-person court. Everything is remote. There are no in-person closings. Everything is still being very carefully protocoled. So it's kind of difficult to make that distinction between COVID and other, things that affected 2022. But I keep seeing it. I don't know if that's true in your case as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One big effect we have, when we do trust, we do a lot of foreign grants or trusts using Florida law, but a non-U.S. trustee, which can be the client, or have a non-U.S. protector. We always wanted to comply with the statute of wills in Florida, because if it ever gets contested, we wanted to have a notary and two witnesses. Well, because of COVID, they couldn't get here. Many people couldn't get here, and they still are having problems because they're not able to get their visas. They are so backlogged. Those embassies and consulates in different countries that are issuing visas are at least 6 months backlogged, if not much farther. But so we couldn't see our clients. They weren't coming in. We couldn't go there, and we couldn't have the notaries at these embassies notarize these documents for us. So here we are standing alone with a document. We're changing the date from 2021, 2022, 2023. Now, I just had one this morning, changing it from 2022. They were just able to get out. So that's a direct effect of COVID. It's still there. It's still affecting everybody.
And Ruben, one thing I want to raise was kind of like a little sub point to what you were just discussing, which has been my experience as well, and very frustrating, in transactions, because people couldn't get here because they were foreigners and they were very high value transactions. We could not get the blessing from some underwriters from a title perspective to ensure the transaction, because we were trying to get them done through Virginia remote online notary. And there were all sorts of, and then, adding insult to injury, in Latin America, passports don't last as long as they do here. In other words, they expire between somewhere 2 to 4 years, sometimes 5 years, and people's passports expired. So they had no current foreign ID to offer. But tell us about foreign notaries, because, notaries here are a dime a dozen. Our Latin American counterparts are actually very important, very rare, and very difficult people to get a handle on or a hold of. Right. And that's something that most of our partners may be familiar with, but so that our associates learn. Tell us about Latin American notaries.
Well, I have 3 cousins, actually. 2 are practicing attorneys in Costa Rica, and they're very proud of in fact, they have LLMs here from the States. And they're very proud of the fact that they're notaries in their home country, because notaries outside of the United States is a prestigious thing. You get paid. You actually get paid to notarize. It's not like here, you fill it out. If you haven't been a criminal and you pay your fee, you pretty much become a notary. It's not like that in Latin America. But the notarizations that we use are the U.S. Embassy notaries. So there are notaries in the embassy that are American notaries, and we use them to sign off on these documents that we couldn't get. And we were loath to use the notarios, the notaries in home country, because I didn't know, I wasn't sure. And none of my colleagues, by the way, I'm part of an international tax group, we meet once a month, could guarantee that those notaries would be upheld as a self-proving document here in the States. So I just didn't use them. But it did delay a lot of things. notarios, though, as you say, they're very well, probably more respected than our attorneys here in the United States.
Correct. And just to add the point I was trying to make, because obviously you have a purpose for notarization that, for example, I wouldn't necessarily need in a deed, because a deed doesn't need to be self-proving. However, the issue is that getting an appointment, just an appointment with a local notary in a jurisdiction takes just as long, if not longer, than a consulary appointment. And on top of that, it is extremely expensive.
Yes.
So when you have a closing where you have, 10, 12 documents to get notarized, all of a sudden that turns into maybe a, $10,000 or $12,000 proposition, which doesn't make a whole lot of people happy.
Right. No, exactly. I think, Manny, I think
I think we're ready to wrap. I guess the last thing we've been asked, if there's any industry tip that we'd like to share, at least on the real estate side, given what I see as a very, very, very promising environment and exportation of capital. I personally think that a good idea would be to have the capacity to be taking on a whole lot of new work in 2023 coming from Latin America.
I agree. And I would add that if any of your clients have property here in the United States and speak with an accent, give one of us a call.
Sounds like a good idea to me.
All right, my friend.
Ruben, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Likewise. Take care, everyone.
Be well.